It all started like any ordinary day, but no one could have predicted that a simple moment would change a young man's life forever. Jason, a 17-year-old black teenager, was raised to always be kind and respectful. Coming from a hard-working but struggling family, he understood the value of small acts of kindness. That evening, he was on his way home from school, exhausted but still aware of the people around him. He waited at one of the busiest bus stops in the city, watching as everyone rushed to their destinations. When the bus finally arrived, Jason stepped inside and found a seat. The bus was packed, with every seat taken and some passengers forced to stand. People were either lost in their phones, staring out the window, or pretending not to notice how crowded the bus had become. A few stops later, a pregnant white woman boarded. She looked tired, holding her belly with one hand and scanning the bus for an empty seat. Jason quickly noticed that no one was making a move to offer her a seat. Some passengers avoided eye contact, while others seemed too distracted to care. For a split second, Jason hesitated. But deep down, he knew what was right. Without thinking twice, he stood up and smiled at her. You can sit here." The woman looked at him for a moment, surprise flickering in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected such kindness. Then, with a warm smile, she said, "Thank you, young man." She slowly sat down, letting out a small sigh of relief. Jason moved to stand near the handrails, gripping them tightly as the bus moved forward. He didn't think much of what had just happened. To him, it was simply the right thing to do. But then, he felt something strange. The woman kept glancing at him, as if she was debating something in her mind. After a few minutes, she reached into her bag, pulled out a small folded note, and handed it to him. "This is for you," she said softly. Jason hesitated before taking it. His heart pounded slightly as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and suddenly, everything around him seemed to blur. His breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled slightly. The words on that note weren't just a simple thank you. They held a secret. A secret that would change Jason's life forever. Jason's fingers hovered over the folded note, uncertainty settling in his chest. The bus hummed along, the steady rhythm of the engine a stark contrast to the thundering pulse in his ears. He couldn't help but wonder what this woman had written. Why had she given it to him? Was it a simple thank you, or was there something more? His mind raced, each possibility more mysterious than the last. The woman, still sitting comfortably in her seat, didn't seem to be paying attention to him anymore. She gazed out of the window, her face calm, but her eyes were distant, as if lost in thought. Jason's curiosity grew, but so did his unease. Why had she given him the note? He had just offered her a seat, it wasn't anything extraordinary. But there was something in her gesture that felt important. After what felt like an eternity, Jason carefully unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the words quickly at first, and then, as the gravity of what he was reading began to sink in, he read it again, slower this time. The note was simple, yet unsettling. "You don't know me, but you are important. What you just did for me will change your life. I know your story, Jason. I've been watching you. There's something you need to know. Something that will alter everything you think you know about yourself. Meet me at the address on the back. Don't tell anyone." The words felt heavy, almost like they were pressing down on him. His name. She knew his name. How? He didn't recognize her, and he was sure he had never seen her before. His heart rate quickened, and a chill crept down his spine. This wasn't just a thank you note. This was something far more mysterious and far more dangerous. Jason folded the note back up, trying to steady his breath. His mind reeled with questions. Who was this woman? What did she mean by "I've been watching you"? And why now? He had no idea how she could know anything about him. He was just an average high school student, nothing special. Sure, he helped people when he could, but this was something else entirely. The bus came to a sudden halt at his stop, jolting Jason from his thoughts. He looked up and realized he had been standing near the exit without even noticing. He hadn't planned on getting off at this stop, but somehow, he felt compelled to leave. The weight of the note in his hand felt like an anchor, pulling him in a direction he wasn't sure he was ready to go. Stepping off the bus, Jason stood on the curb for a moment, his mind still spinning. The woman's words echoed in his head. "You are important." What did that mean? He had no idea. His instincts told him to ignore it, to forget about the note and carry on with his life like nothing had happened. But something inside him wouldn't let go. There was a pull, a force, drawing him toward the address on the back of the note. What if this was his chance to understand something bigger? What if it was the key to something he had always felt was missing in his life? Jason shoved the note into his pocket and began walking. He had to figure out what was going on. He couldn't just let this go. The sun was beginning to set as he made his way through the familiar streets. The city had a different feel in the evening, quiet, almost surreal. Jason's footsteps echoed in the empty streets, each step a reminder that he was now caught in something much bigger than himself. When he finally arrived at the address on the note, his heart pounded in his chest. It was an old, run-down building on the edge of town, one he had never noticed before. It looked abandoned, its windows dark and empty. The door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for him to enter. Jason stood frozen in place, his mind racing with every possible scenario. Should he knock? Should he just walk away? The decision weighed heavily on him. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The interior was dark and smelled faintly of dust and old wood. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the building, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. It was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of something far in the back of the building. Jason didn't know what it was, but it didn't sound like anything he had ever heard before. He cautiously moved forward, the floor creaking beneath his feet. There were no signs of life, no people, no voices, just an eerie silence. But the further he went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following him. He reached the back of the building, where the hum seemed to be coming from. There, in the center of the room, stood a woman. The same woman from the bus. She didn't look at him as he entered, she was focused on something else, a strange device in her hands, a kind of tablet or screen. It flickered with images that Jason couldn't quite make out from where he stood. When she finally looked up, her expression was calm, almost serene. "Jason," she said softly, her voice steady, "I knew you would come." Jason swallowed hard. The tension in the room was palpable, and he had no idea what to expect next. The woman, still holding the device, motioned for him to come closer. "What is this?" Jason asked, his voice trembling slightly despite himself. The woman smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "It's just the beginning." Jason's mind raced. What did she mean? The beginning of what? He didn't have the answers, but every instinct inside him told him he had to stay, to find out what she was talking about. "You've been chosen, Jason. Not by chance, but by design. There's something in your past, something you don't know about, something that could change the world. And you've been given a role to play in it." Jason blinked. He had no idea what she was talking about. He was just a regular teenager. He hadn't been involved in anything important. Or had he? Before he could ask another question, the woman's eyes shifted toward the door. Jason followed her gaze, and his heart skipped a beat. Someone else was coming. Jason's heart raced as he followed the woman's gaze. The door behind him creaked open slowly, sending a chill through his body. He turned, and his eyes widened as he saw a man step into the room. His face was obscured by shadows, his figure tall and imposing. There was something about him that made Jason's stomach tighten with unease. The man's footsteps were deliberate, echoing loudly in the silence of the room. Jason's instincts screamed at him to leave, to run, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. The woman beside him didn't seem at all disturbed. In fact, she stood perfectly still, almost waiting for the man to approach. As the man stepped into the light, Jason could make out his features, sharp jawline, dark eyes, and a cold expression that seemed to hold secrets of its own. His presence felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened. "You brought him here." The man's voice was low and rough, like gravel being scraped together. The woman nodded, her calm demeanor unshaken. "He's the one," she said softly. Jason's mind was spinning. What did she mean by "he's the one"? The one for what? He wanted to ask, to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just walked into something much bigger than himself, something dangerous. The man's eyes finally shifted to Jason, studying him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "You have no idea, do you?" Jason blinked, his voice barely a whisper. "No idea about what?" The man chuckled darkly. "You're part of something that's been set in motion for years, kid. This isn't just some random act of kindness you did today. That woman on the bus, she didn't just give you a seat because you were nice. She was watching you, observing. And now, you've walked into a game you can't get out of." Jason felt a rush of confusion. A game? Watching him? He tried to wrap his mind around what the man was saying, but it all felt too surreal, like something out of a movie. The woman stepped forward then, her eyes meeting Jason's. "You don't understand yet, but you will. There's more to your story, Jason, more than you've ever been told." Jason's thoughts were a whirlwind. He didn't know what to believe. His life had been so ordinary, so quiet, up until this moment. Now, it seemed as though everything he thought he knew was being turned upside down. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all he could do was stand there, his breath shallow, his mind reeling. The man took a step closer, his eyes darkening. "You've been chosen because of your bloodline. Your family. There's a legacy, Jason. A legacy you've never been told about. And now, you're caught in the middle of it." Jason's stomach lurched. What did that even mean? His family. He was just an ordinary kid from a working-class neighborhood. His family wasn't special. Or so he thought. Before he could ask more questions, the man held up a hand, silencing him. "I know this is a lot to process. But you need to understand this, Jason. There are people out there who will do anything to stop what's coming. They'll go to great lengths to keep the truth hidden." The woman spoke again, her tone almost reassuring. "We've been protecting you, Jason, from a truth you're not ready for. But you need to know that your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine." Jason's mind raced. He wanted to push for more answers, but something in the room made him feel small, insignificant. The tension was thick, and it was as if every word spoken carried weight. Just then, the sound of footsteps outside the building grew louder. Jason's head snapped toward the door, and his heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. Another figure appeared in the doorway, this time a woman, older than the others. She moved with purpose, her expression stern and unreadable. Behind her, there were two more figures, silent and imposing. Jason's eyes widened. Who were they? What was happening here? The woman with the cold eyes stepped forward, her gaze flickering to Jason before turning to the man and the woman he had been speaking to. "He's here, then," she said, her voice like ice. The man nodded. "It's time." Jason's confusion grew as the atmosphere in the room shifted. There was an undeniable tension between the newcomers and the two people who had been with him. Whatever was happening, Jason was now in the center of it, and he couldn't escape. "You need to leave now," the older woman said, her eyes locked on Jason. "They're coming for you." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Who was coming for him? And why? Jason's heart raced, panic creeping in. He didn't know who to trust, or even if he should trust anyone at all. The only thing that felt real in that moment was the overwhelming sense of danger surrounding him. The man looked at the woman with cold eyes, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "I've made my choice," he said slowly. "We protect him now. Whatever it takes." Jason barely had time to process the words before the older woman grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "Move, now," she hissed, urgency lacing her tone. Before he could react, the door slammed shut behind them, and they were plunged into the dark, narrow hallway outside. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know where he was being taken, or what was happening to him, but one thing was clear: his life had just become a nightmare. The woman led him through the building at a hurried pace, her grip tight on his arm. "Stay quiet," she instructed in a whisper. "They can't know you're with us." Jason could barely keep up, his mind still swirling with the revelations he had just heard. What was his bloodline? Who were these people, and what did they want from him? His questions seemed to multiply with each step he took, but none of them had answers. All he knew was that he was now a part of something much bigger than himself. And whatever it was coming for him. The woman stopped suddenly in front of a door, pausing to listen. Jason held his breath, heart racing as the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. His world was closing in, and he didn't know if he would survive what was about to happen next. Jason's breath caught in his throat as the woman pressed her back against the door, her eyes wide with fear. The footsteps outside had grown louder, closer. He could hear the sound of heavy boots hitting the floor, echoing through the narrow hallway, and his mind raced to figure out what was happening. Who were these people after him? Why was everyone so desperate to keep him hidden? The woman's hand was shaking as she reached for the door handle, her knuckles white from the pressure. She glanced at Jason with wide eyes, her face tense with determination. "We don't have much time. We need to move fast." Jason nodded, his heart hammering against his chest. He couldn't think clearly, his mind was tangled in a web of questions, each one more pressing than the last. All he knew was that something terrible was coming, and there was no escaping it now. The woman motioned for him to stay close, then turned the handle just enough to peek outside. Jason held his breath, barely daring to move. The sound of the footsteps was nearly deafening, and for a moment, he thought they might be caught. But then, just as quickly, the noise seemed to fade. "They're coming this way," she whispered urgently, her eyes darting back and forth. "We have to go now." Before Jason could process her words, she grabbed his arm again, pulling him down the hallway. The dim light flickered above them as they moved in hurried silence. Jason's legs felt like lead, each step heavier than the last. He wasn't sure where they were going, or if they could even outrun whatever was after them, but the fear in the woman's eyes told him they couldn't afford to stop. As they rounded the corner, the hallway opened into a small room. There was a narrow window on the far wall, but it was covered with thick curtains, leaving the room cloaked in darkness. The woman released his arm and moved quickly to the window, pulling the curtains aside just enough to peek through. Jason's pulse quickened as he watched her scan the street below. "They're not far," she muttered, almost to herself. She turned to him, her face etched with urgency. "We need to leave now, before they catch up to us." Jason nodded again, his thoughts a blur. His body was on autopilot now, moving through the motions as his mind struggled to catch up with the nightmare unfolding around him. He had no idea what kind of danger he was in, but he knew one thing for sure, it was real. The woman grabbed a small, worn-out bag from the floor and threw it over her shoulder, then gestured for Jason to follow. She led him to a small door at the far end of the room, which creaked open with a painful slowness. The air outside was cool, the night sky overcast with clouds, and for a brief moment, Jason thought he could escape all of this. But that feeling didn't last long. As soon as they stepped outside, the weight of the night pressed down on him. The sounds of the city seemed muted, far away, as if everything had been swallowed up by the darkness. Jason's eyes darted to the shadows, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. "Stay close," the woman whispered, her grip tightening on his arm again. They moved quickly, slipping through alleyways and side streets, always keeping to the shadows. Jason's chest ached with each breath, and his head was spinning with everything that had happened. Why was this happening to him? What did they want from him? They reached a small, inconspicuous car parked at the end of a quiet street. The woman didn't hesitate. She unlocked the door, and they both slipped inside. Jason didn't know where they were going, but he didn't dare ask. The woman slammed the door shut and started the engine, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The engine roared to life, and they sped off, the tires screeching as they left the building behind. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no turning back now. The woman remained silent as she drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel with an almost unnatural intensity. Jason couldn't help but glance at her, studying her profile in the dim light. Who was she? What was this all about? He had so many questions, but every time he opened his mouth, he felt like he might get an answer that was worse than the silence. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed to a stop in front of an old, run-down building. The woman glanced at him, her eyes hardened with determination. "This is it," she said quietly. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." Jason didn't ask any questions as he followed her out of the car. His legs felt weak, and his mind raced. What was going on? What was so dangerous that people were willing to kill for it? They entered the building, and the woman led him down a narrow hallway to a room at the back. There, in the middle of the floor, was a large, ancient-looking book. It was open, as though someone had been waiting for them. Jason's heart skipped a beat. There was something about the book that felt important, something that seemed to pulse with power. The woman reached for it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned a few pages. She then stopped, her eyes scanning the text in front of her. "This is what they're after," she said softly. "This book, it holds everything. All the answers, everything you need to know about your past, about your bloodline." Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. His past. His bloodline. He had no idea what any of this meant. Before he could speak, the door to the room suddenly burst open, and Jason's heart dropped. The man from earlier, the one with the cold eyes, stepped into the room, followed by several other figures. Their faces were grim, their eyes fixed on Jason with an intensity that sent a chill through him. "We've been looking for you," the man said, his voice cold and flat. Jason's stomach churned. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run, and no one to help him. His world had just become something unrecognizable. The game was no longer a secret, it was real. The woman stepped in front of him, her body tense. "You'll never take him." The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile that spoke of power, of control. "We'll see about that." Jason could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him. The truth was close, but he was about to learn just how much it could cost. Jason's heart was pounding in his chest as the man's cold smile lingered in the room. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to run, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The woman stood between him and the others, her face a mask of defiance, yet Jason could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't as confident as she appeared. "Do you think you can protect him?" the man sneered, his voice like ice. "You don't understand the forces at play here. This isn't just some petty game. This is a war, and Jason is the key." Jason's mind raced. A key? He was just an ordinary guy, he couldn't be the key to anything. Could he? The woman shifted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You've underestimated him," she said with quiet determination. "And you've underestimated me. He's not just the key. He's the one who's going to stop you." Jason wanted to ask what they were talking about, to demand answers, but something in the air told him that now wasn't the time. He needed to stay quiet, to watch, to listen. But as the tension grew thicker, something unexpected happened. A sharp, metallic sound echoed through the room, a door creaking open, followed by the shuffle of footsteps. The man's expression faltered for just a moment, a flash of surprise crossing his face. Before anyone could react, a third figure stepped into the room, and Jason's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, tall and commanding, but there was something entirely different about him. He radiated an aura of authority and power that made everyone else in the room seem insignificant. The woman who had been protecting Jason froze, her hand trembling as she stepped back. "No, it can't be." The man who had spoken before looked shocked, his eyes darting to the newcomer with a mix of fear and reverence. What are you doing here?" The newcomer didn't answer immediately. He simply stepped further into the room, his eyes never leaving Jason. His gaze was intense, piercing, as if he was reading every part of Jason's soul in an instant. Jason's mind spun. What was happening? Who was this man? Why was everyone so scared of him? The newcomer finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You're all too late." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jason had no idea what they meant, but he could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. His head was spinning, and he could barely breathe through the tension building in the room. The man with the cold eyes stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "What do you want?" he growled. The newcomer didn't seem to flinch. In fact, he barely acknowledged the challenge. Instead, he turned his gaze to Jason, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't get out of hand," he said quietly. Jason's heart skipped a beat. What didn't he want to get out of hand? The situation was already out of control, and every new development only seemed to make things worse. He could feel the darkness closing in around him, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. Then, the impossible happened. The woman who had been protecting Jason, the one who had insisted they were on the same side, suddenly stepped aside, her eyes downcast, her shoulders slumped. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice cracking. She looked at him with a mixture of regret and resignation. "I'm sorry, Jason. I never wanted this. But you need to understand, this is bigger than both of us." Jason couldn't comprehend what she was saying. It felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under him. She had been his only ally, the only person who had been trying to protect him. Now, it seemed like she was turning on him. The man with the cold eyes turned to the newcomer, a triumphant smile playing at the edges of his lips. "I knew you'd show up eventually. You're just as predictable as everyone else in this game." The newcomer's eyes flashed with something darker, and for a moment, Jason could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. But it quickly disappeared, replaced by an almost eerie calm. "I'm not here to play games," he said coldly. "I'm here to end them." Jason's head was spinning faster now. What games? What was happening? His life had been upended in the blink of an eye, and every time he thought he might be getting close to the truth, another twist came along to send him further into the unknown. The woman who had once been his protector now stood quietly behind the newcomer, her face hollow with regret. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Jason's stomach turned. Had she known about all of this? Had she known that her actions would lead him here? And more importantly, was there anyone he could trust? As if in answer to his silent question, the man with the cold eyes stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Jason's with a fierce intensity. "You don't have a choice in this, Jason. You're already in too deep. They've been planning this for years, and you've been part of it from the very beginning." Jason tried to process the words, but they made no sense. He had never asked for any of this. He had never done anything to deserve being dragged into a war he didn't understand. And now, it felt like there was no escape. The tension in the room was unbearable. Jason's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out, but there were no answers, only more questions. The man with the cold eyes was right about one thing: he was in too deep now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the only thing he knew for sure was that the truth, whatever it was dangerously close to being exposed. But as the silence dragged on, the newcomer, this mysterious, powerful figure, spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "I don't need anyone's help to end this. I just need Jason." Jason's breath caught. The words echoed in his mind, and suddenly, everything shifted. Whatever he thought he knew about this situation, whatever he thought he understood, was about to be shattered once again. The real game was just beginning, and he was at the center of it all. Jason's pulse raced as the words hung in the air. The newcomer's chilling statement, "I just need Jason," sent a shock through his chest. He couldn't breathe. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with uncertainty. The man with the cold eyes, who had once seemed so certain of his control, looked less confident now, his face hardening. "You're making a mistake," he spat at the newcomer, his voice a low growl. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." But the newcomer didn't flinch. He simply turned his attention back to Jason, his cold, piercing eyes fixed on him as if Jason was the only person in the room. "I'm not making a mistake. I'm here to finish what should have been done a long time ago." Jason felt like he was in a nightmare, unable to escape, trapped between two sides, one that wanted to control him, and another that seemed intent on destroying everything he thought he knew. But the worst part was, he still didn't understand why. Why him? Why was he so important? "Jason," the woman who had once protected him said, her voice soft but full of regret. She stepped toward him slowly, her face pained. "I didn't want you to know this. I wanted to protect you from the truth. But it's time." Jason turned to face her, desperate for answers. "What truth? What's going on?" She took a deep breath and glanced at the newcomer, as though asking for permission to speak. He nodded slightly, and she continued, her voice trembling. "You're not just anyone, Jason. You're the heir to a powerful legacy. Your bloodline, It's connected to something ancient. Something dangerous. This book, she said, pointing to the large, worn-out book on the floor, holds the answers. It's been passed down through generations, and you're the key to unlocking its full potential. Jason's mind reeled. The heir to what? Dangerous? What was this woman talking about? The newcomer's voice interrupted his thoughts, cutting through the confusion. Your bloodline was chosen, Jason. Chosen to wield power beyond your imagination. But with that power comes responsibility. And people like him, he nodded toward the man with the cold eyes, will stop at nothing to control it. Jason turned to the man who had been pursuing him. You've been hunting me because of this. The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. You think I want to control you? I want to end you, Jason. Your bloodline represents a threat to everything we've worked for. We can't let someone like you stand in the way of our plans. Suddenly, Jason's mind snapped into focus. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, but they didn't fit the way he thought they would. He had been a target for so long, running from one danger after another. But it was never about him being ordinary. It was about him being the exact opposite. The heir to something more dangerous than he could comprehend. A realization hit him like a tidal wave. He wasn't just part of this mess, he was the mess. The legacy he never asked for, the bloodline that had tied him to this war, was his responsibility now. And if he didn't act, everything would collapse around him. Jason's heart thundered in his chest as he turned to the newcomer, his voice shaky but firm. What do you want from me? The newcomer's gaze softened for a brief moment, almost as though he understood Jason's turmoil. I'm not here to control you, Jason. I'm here to help you control it. To guide you in using the power that's been awakened inside of you. Jason was about to speak when the man with the cold eyes lunged forward. In an instant, the tension in the room escalated as everyone seemed to move at once. The woman who had been so protective of him stepped forward, blocking Jason, her hands raised in defense. No. You're not taking him. There was a flash of movement, a blur of bodies, but the world seemed to slow as Jason stood frozen, overwhelmed by the intensity of what was happening. He couldn't think, couldn't react. But then, just as quickly, he felt something shift inside him. A surge of energy unlike anything he had ever experienced coursed through his veins. The room seemed to tremble as if it were reacting to him, to his newfound power. The air crackled with an electric charge, and Jason's eyes widened in shock as the book on the floor began to glow faintly. He felt the power, deep within him, a force pulling him toward something he couldn't yet grasp. Before anyone could react, the man with the cold eyes halted, his expression faltering as he looked at Jason with a mix of fear and disbelief. No, this isn't possible. But it was. Jason could feel it now, the power coursing through him, growing stronger with every passing second. The woman, still standing in front of him, looked at him with awe and something else, hope. You did it, she whispered. You unlocked it. The man with the cold eyes stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon hidden under his coat. You've gone too far. You don't understand what you've just done. Jason's eyes locked onto the newcomer, his mind racing. What does this mean? What do I have to do now? The newcomer smiled, though it was a smile full of darkness and resolve. Now, you take control. You're the one who can end this, who can decide if this war will ever end. Just as Jason opened his mouth to ask more questions, there was a sudden, thunderous noise from outside, an explosion. The building shook, and the lights flickered. The door burst open, and armed men stormed into the room. But Jason didn't flinch. He didn't feel fear anymore. The power within him was rising, and with it came a new understanding of what he was capable of. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. But this time, he would be the one in control. In the midst of the chaos, Jason looked around at the faces in the room, the woman who had protected him, the man who had tried to destroy him, the newcomer who had opened his eyes to his true potential. The war was still ongoing, but Jason knew one thing for certain: the tables had turned. And he was no longer the prey. With a final glance at the book, Jason stepped forward, ready to embrace his destiny. But as the dust settled, a final, shocking twist came into view. The woman, his protector, was not who she seemed. The truth about her involvement in all of this was darker than Jason could ever have imagined. And just like that, everything changed again. Jason's mind spun as the truth hit him like a freight train. The woman who had protected him, the one he had trusted above all else, wasn't who she appeared to be. The faint, almost imperceptible smile she gave him as she stood there, facing him with a look of resignation, sent a chill down his spine. Her eyes, which once held only concern and warmth, now seemed cold, calculating. "Jason, she began, her voice shaking, but she didn't finish the sentence. There was a long pause, a silence that felt like an eternity as Jason tried to make sense of everything happening around him. The armed men who had stormed into the room were now standing still, watching the unfolding scene with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The newcomer, who had revealed the truth about Jason's heritage, looked back at the woman and shook his head slowly. "I knew you had a hidden agenda, but I didn't expect this." Jason couldn't find the words to speak. Everything he thought he knew about the woman who had protected him for so long, everything he trusted, was crumbling before his eyes. He stepped back, distancing himself from her as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He couldn't think straight, he needed answers. "Why?" Jason finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do this? Why keep the truth from me?" The woman's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of someone caught in a web of her own making, someone who had never fully realized how deep she had gotten into the game. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, Jason. You have to understand. I was just trying to protect you from a war that's been brewing for centuries. I didn't want you to get involved in all of this. But the moment you were born, the moment your bloodline was revealed, there was no turning back." Jason's heart was racing again. He was overwhelmed, his mind grasping for some sense of order in the chaos. He had been born into this war. It was in his blood, in his very DNA. But now, it wasn't just about survival, it was about choice. He could either accept the power that lay dormant inside him, take control of his destiny, and finish what had started, or he could let it all spiral out of his hands and watch everything crumble. "I never wanted this for you," the woman said, her voice breaking. "But you have a responsibility, Jason. The book, the legacy, it's all part of a cycle that has been repeating for centuries. And now, you are the one who holds the key." Jason felt the weight of her words. He wasn't just a pawn in some ancient game. He was the game's final piece. He was the one who could stop it, or let it continue for another generation. The power was his now. The newcomer stepped forward, his voice calm yet unwavering. "The truth is, Jason, you're not just the key to this war. You're the one who can end it. If you decide to embrace your heritage and what it means, you can control everything, the power, the legacy. But if you refuse, then others will take it from you. And they will use it to control the world." Jason felt the weight of the decision. He thought of the people he loved, of everything that could be lost if he didn't make the right choice. The stakes were so much higher than he could have ever imagined, but there was no turning back now. He looked at the woman, his former protector, who was now just another player in a game much larger than he could comprehend. "I trusted you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were supposed to help me. You were supposed to be on my side." She closed her eyes and nodded, her face etched with regret. "I am sorry, Jason. But in this world, no one is purely good or purely evil. I did what I thought was best, even if it wasn't the truth." Jason turned away from her, his gaze shifting to the newcomer. The man who had come to guide him, to show him his true potential. This was the only ally he had left. Jason knew that whatever choice he made next, it would shape the future in ways he couldn't yet understand. "I'll do it," Jason said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'll take control of this. I'll end it." The newcomer gave him a nod, as though he had been waiting for Jason to make this decision all along. "Good. It's not easy, but it's the only way forward." With that, the room seemed to shift. The tension that had been thick in the air started to dissipate, as if the power that Jason now held within him was settling. The armed men who had been standing ready to strike slowly lowered their weapons. The woman who had betrayed him seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, though it was clear she no longer had a place in this new chapter of Jason's life. But as Jason stepped forward, Finally embracing the power he had once feared, he could sense something else, something dark and unspoken, lingering in the shadows. The story wasn't over. It couldn't be. The war had only just begun. As the newcomer turned and motioned for Jason to follow, Jason hesitated. "What happens now?" he asked. "You lead," the newcomer said simply. "You've made your choice. You'll use the power, but remember, it's not just about you. It's about everyone. You have to be strong enough to see this through." Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had chosen to face this legacy head-on. The next chapter was his to write. But just as they reached the door, the woman's voice stopped him. "Jason, be careful," she called out, her voice heavy with warning. "Not everyone will want you to win." Jason turned, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he said, "I know. But I'm not backing down." And with that, he stepped into the unknown, ready to face the future, knowing the road ahead would be filled with challenges and uncertainty. The power was his, but the responsibility was even greater. As the door closed behind him, Jason took one final glance back at the life he had known, the life that was now behind him. The legacy was his now. The choices, the battles, the war, it was all in his hands. The real story had just begun.